Arizona is one of Donald Trump's best polling states, with him holding a current lead over Kamala Harris by about 1.5 points. And this is very similar to the polling results we're seeing out of Georgia. So in today's video, we're going to talk about why Donald Trump is strong in Arizona as opposed to some of the other swing states. And again, this is still a very close contest, but Arizona and Georgia are the only current swing states that Donald Trump is leading in. North Carolina as well, so I guess those three. The rest is either tied or down to Kamala Harris. So we're going to talk about why this is the case, what issues are at the forefront of the Arizona campaign, and ultimately, more broadly, what the implications are for this polling in other swing states around the country, because Arizona is a heavily suburban state, but it's also a Sunbelt state, so we could see a potential geographic pattern going on here, and why Arizona ultimately is very important to Trump's path to 270. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second, but first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. Now, Arizona has politically transformed over the last decade. It's went from a reliably Republican state to a purple state that leans Democratic at this point when it comes to federal elections. I mean, Republicans haven't won a federal office in Arizona since 2016 when Donald Trump and John McCain were both elected. Trump by a much smaller margin and McCain being reelected by a pretty wide margin as an incumbent senator from the state. So that was really the last time we saw Arizona go red on a federal level. Every other time since then, Republicans have run Martha McSally, they've run Blake Masters, and now they're running Kari Lake. And none of those candidates are going to break through because they're not the types of Republicans that win in Arizona. But it's interesting to see that despite Donald Trump having lost Arizona in 2020 and presumably suburban trends being worse for Donald Trump in 2024, the polling is actually favorable to him, with the latest poll having Trump up by 1 point, Emerson having him up by 3, Harris up by 2 in high ground, Suffolk having him up by 6, so on and so forth, which ultimately brings you to an RCP average of 1.4. Now, if we compare this to where the race was when Biden was the nominee, Trump was up in Arizona by nearly 6 points, and this was also one of Trump's best polling states. So this goes beyond just Kamala Harris being the nominee. Even when Biden was the nominee, Trump was still doing well in Arizona polling-wise. And I've always been surprised by this because this is more seen as a leftward trending state. Maricopa County, the Phoenix suburbs, the Tucson suburbs have all been zooming towards the left, and that's why you've seen Arizona become so competitive. And a lot of the results here brought down to just single digits of 1 or 2 points. And now we're looking at, of course, a scenario where Trump is up narrowly, but Arizona is almost guaranteed to be incredibly close this time around. I mean, back in 2020, Donald Trump only lost Arizona by around 11,000 votes. So this was actually closer than Georgia in terms of raw vote, and Trump only lost the state by 0.3%. So this is obviously always going to be a battleground. But I think one of the reasons Donald Trump is polling better here than in North Carolina or even the Rust Belt states is because I think the border is a super salient issue, and the Trump campaign, to its credit, has been hammering on about the issue of the border, and Arizona naturally is a border state. The border has huge implications here because you do see a lot of trafficking in this state, a lot of gang violence due to the border. And I think that's why you're seeing Donald Trump do slightly better here than in a place like North Carolina. Now, the border is a national issue. In Arizona in particular, it's been such a central focal point of their politics because the issue is always front and center. Now, if we look at favorability in terms of Kamala Harris, I think this is another interesting point. Kamala Harris has the lowest net favorable rating in any swing state. In Arizona, it's -10. In Nevada, -8. Georgia, -4. North Carolina, it's about even. Pennsylvania, -4. Michigan, -4. And in Wisconsin, it's actually in the positives. So Arizona by far has the lowest net favorability rating for Kamala Harris, which is likely, again, another reason why she's polling so poorly here. And we saw something similar with Joe Biden as well. Arizona still is a very historically Republican state, and I think that's one of the reasons why you have such a residual favorability towards Republicans more broadly. Now, Donald Trump is not popular in Arizona. His favorability is pretty low here, but so is Kamala Harris's, so I think that kind of sets up for a very even contest. When we look at the political geography of the state, Maricopa County, home to Phoenix, makes up about 2/3 of the state's population, and Joe Biden ended up winning this county by 2.2%, which ultimately translated into him winning the state by 0.3. So all Donald Trump needs to do in Maricopa County, he doesn't even need to win it, he just needs to keep the county within about 2 points on the dot in order to win the rest of the state very narrowly, because this obviously depends on turnout in the outer state area, places like Mojave County, a decent sized population, super Republican. Obviously, you need those voters to come out. Yuma, these other areas. And obviously, he needs to stem the GOP bleeding in a place like Pima County, where Trump only got less than 40% of the vote back in 2020. So really, it's all about a game of keeping the suburbs stagnant and doing a little bit better in the rest of the state. And that's really going to be Trump's formula throughout the entire country, because Donald Trump is not somebody who has really been able to make inroads with educated suburban voters, and that is a huge voting base in Arizona. And you've seen a lot of migration from other states here as well, places like California, Nevada, the West Coast, so on and so forth. So you have to target a message to these educated professionals who have increasingly been moving more towards Kamala Harris and the Democrats. So that's another reason why you've seen Arizona shift toward the left. It's a demographic issue. You have an increasing Hispanic population, an increasing college-educated population, and these are all factors that obviously benefit the Democrats. And even with Donald Trump potentially going to get a couple points better with the Latino vote, it doesn't really matter all that much when Kamala Harris is doing better with high-propensity college-educated suburban voters. Now, the early vote that we looked at in Virginia has been somewhat good for Republicans. It's shown that there's an increase in lower propensity voters coming out to vote in rural western parts of the state. But Virginia is a world away from Arizona geographically and even politically. There's very different dynamics at play there. But if Virginia is any indication as to how the electorate is thinking more broadly in terms of lower propensity voters coming out, I think that's something that helps Donald Trump, because Kamala Harris is going to benefit from the educated liberal suburbanite who votes in every election, and she's counting on those people to turn out and vote at the same numbers they did in 2020, because that's ultimately how Joe Biden won the 2020 election. It was with record high turnout, particularly among college whites, and that's a demographic that Trump needs to improve with in order to win 2024. He either has to improve with them, or he has to keep his numbers about the same, improve with non-college white voters and minority voters. So that's really his key to victory. And Arizona is crucial to that path to 270, because if we take a look at the Battleground Map, and I didn't mean to not highlight New York there, but if we take a look at the Battleground Map, now if Arizona goes to Kamala Harris, Trump still has a path to the presidency. It runs through the eastern part of the country, and we made a video talking about this. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, those are critical. But if the Sun Belt falls, and if Arizona is any indication as how the Sun Belt is going to vote, if he loses Georgia, then the path to the presidency becomes incredibly difficult, because Trump needs Pennsylvania. He already needs Pennsylvania, but now he really needs it. He needs to hold on to North Carolina, and then he needs to win Nevada, Wisconsin to get to 270, or he needs to win Michigan, and then he can lose Nevada. So those are really where the paths are, but in this situation, Trump needs the entire Rust Belt. So sealing off the Sun Belt would be a huge blow to the Trump campaign and makes the path to 270 much more difficult, because even though Kamala Harris is sort of struggling in a lot of the Rust Belt states, they still are residual Democratic states. They still are more likely than not going to vote for Kamala Harris. So that's why Donald Trump needs to shore up his support in the Sun Belt. And Arizona is key to that. Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. Now, as it stands right now, Nevada, the polling is favorable to Kamala Harris. She's up in the polls there. And typically, Nevada has overstated Republican support. So if Kamala's up by 1 or 2, you can imagine she might win the state by 3 or 4 percentage points, which potentially bodes poorly for Trump in Arizona, because the states have become a lot more closer politically over the past decade. Because if you go back to 2012, Mitt Romney won Arizona by 9, Barack Obama won Nevada by like 6 or 7 points. So those states were politically like 15 points apart in terms of margin. Now you're looking at states that vote very similarly. Arizona went to Joe Biden by 0.3, Nevada went to Joe Biden by 2.4. So the states are a lot more similar now in their voting patterns. So if Kamala Harris is winning Nevada by 4 points, she's probably winning Arizona, which means she's probably winning Georgia as well. And really, Trump's only path lies in the Rust Belt. Now, the good news for him is that Kamala Harris does have some pretty bad polls that have come out in Wisconsin. Tammy Baldwin in the state has, at least according to her internals, only a 2-point lead over her Republican challenger, Eric Hovde, which we'll talk about in tomorrow's video, because that could be disastrous. That could mean you have higher turnout from low propensity voters who are voting Republican in the more rural parts of the state, the western part of the state, the driftless area in the Southwest, and that is really bad for Kamala Harris and Tammy Baldwin. But in terms of Arizona, Trump polling in the positives there is pretty surprising. I wonder how long this is going to last. against Kamala Harris. If we take a look at the Senate contest, there is a massive split verdict in Arizona. Voters in the state giving Ruben Gallego, a progressive Democrat, an 8-point lead over Kari Lake, who is a Trump acolyte, who basically rose to fame within the Republican Party as being Trump in heels, and she's losing by 8 points, while Donald Trump himself is up by around 1.5 points. So there's probably going to be a decent split ticket in Arizona. Do I expect Kari Lake to lose by 8 points? It's very possible, especially given the fact that she's just so unpopular in the state. Some polls have Ruben Gallego getting 55% of the vote, which is disastrous for the GOP. So obviously the Republicans set themselves up for failure there. But if we take a look at the map for Arizona superintendent, this was a race where the Republicans actually defeated a Democratic incumbent statewide in Arizona, and they did it while losing Maricopa County by 2 points. That's why I said earlier, Donald Trump needs to keep Maricopa County within about 2 points in order to win the rest of the state, because if you have a narrow margin here, it can be made up in places like Mojave County, Yuma County, Yavapai County, Pinal County, these redder ex-urban, well, you really can't call them ex-urban, Arizona is such a vast state, but these red, more populated counties, because that's really the key to victory there. So this is likely the Trump victory map. If Donald Trump wins Arizona, it's by keeping Maricopa County within 2 points and getting over 40% of the vote in Pima County. So those are the numbers he needs to shoot for, and obviously the early vote is key to that. So far, the early vote has been decent for Republicans in Virginia, but obviously we still have about a month to go before the election, so a lot can certainly change. And in Virginia, Democrats have a tendency to come out and vote later in the early vote season, so that could be why we're seeing sort of a red mirage in the state. But obviously, if the trend continues, that's certainly good news for Donald Trump and the Republicans. And naturally, if Trump wins Arizona on election night, he has a pretty decent shot at winning a second term. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.